And so we kind of wanted to come up with a cute little thing to help them remember unpacking. So we came up with the 3 U's. So our first U was to understand the standards, whether it's language arts or math. We really dive deep into the standards. We read them really carefully, and it really helps to understand every part. The essential knowledge, the teacher notes, the standard itself.
And not only just, we also have to understand the WIDA can-do goals. And basically they offer a range of expectations for student performance across the 5 English language levels and proficiency levels. And then we take that information, we use that information to differentiate our lessons when we start the framing process.
I think one thing too that's important about the WIDA goals is that the WIDA goals are designed for the students to meet those standards for the access testing, but we take that language from that chart on the WIDA can-do descriptors, and we all work together as a team to change the language to match the content standard that we're teaching.
And the second U is to unify the team. So when we're actually filling out the template, we put the vocabulary that we're going to be using, the SOL, STEMs, assessments, and that way when we leave the meeting after the unpacking, we're all unified because we'll be using the same vocabulary. Our word walls will look the same. We're going to have the same sentence starters so that the kids are, and as Craig said, if there are twins in 2 different classes, they're getting the same education. So when we leave, we're all on the same page.
The last U is use assessments as instructional tools, and we look at the assessment prior to planning because we want to make sure that we're actually teaching what the kids need to know, and we base our planning off of it. We now know where they need to be at the end of our unit.
I think part of the role of a specialist is making sure that the assessment tool is designed before we begin our teaching. And part of that is in my past teaching and learning, understanding by design and things like that, that if we don't know where the kids have to be and we don't make and take that assessment ourselves, then we're not going to know what they have to be able to do. And we talked about something that you do in math that we'd like to do more in reading this year, is when we make and take the assessments, and even Craig and Julie would take the assessments. And then we're talking more about teaching out the errors. Like instead of after they take the assessment, 50% of the kids picked B. Well, why did they pick that? That conversation needs to occur before we teach, not after they take the assessment and pick the wrong answer. So that's something that we're trying to shift a little bit this year in our teaching.
Okay, so we're just going to quickly go over our goals in this meeting, and then we'll start our meeting. I'm the recorder and also the historian, so I bring things from past years to the meeting, and I take the notes as everyone's talking.
I'm the assessment guru, so I look at released VDOE SOL tests, I look at lesson plans, and I look at data from previous years.
Last year was the vertical alignment, but this year I'm also going to take on the agenda keeper. So I would look at past what they learned in previous years and where they're going to go next year in 5th grade, and I would compare. I would put them in a chart and look up the essential understandings and knowledge and have that in there too. And then the agenda keeper, I am going to be during meetings taking notes on what we talk about, and if somebody offers to make something, I'm going to write that down and make sure the whole team knows who's going to be making what and who to go to for.
I'm responsible for presenting the WIDA goals to the teammates, making sure that they understand what the LAP students can do for each level. And I'm also going to help out Sabrina as an assessment guru, so I can make sure that our assessments are also geared towards our LAP students.
I'm going to be the facilitator, but I was going to say something about roles. You can keep the same roles all year. You can shift them around. It's entirely up to your team. Some teams really stick solid to I'm the assessment guru, and that's what I'm doing, where other teams will be like, well, 3 of us are going to go ahead and work on an assessment. It doesn't mean that you're ever alone. You'll find within the teams that once you have a role, there is some collaboration. And I also want to say something about, when you're taking notes, and that's one thing we noticed the past couple of years at Westgate, that we would be at team meetings, especially if it's a large team, like, 9 people are there, and they're saying, well, we're gonna do this next, yeah, we're gonna do that, and we leave and we go teach, at the end of the day, somebody goes, what did we say we were gonna, it was critical that the person who sets the agenda was also writing down things that we said we were going to do, because some of us by the end of the day didn't remember what we said we were going to do. So that was super important because we had a lot of miscommunication, and then people weren't prepared.
Okay, yes. The template?
Sure.
Okay, so on the screen right now, I have our unpacking template. So across the top, it just says grade level 4. And what we're unpacking today is part of we wanted to do a large genre study unit at the beginning of the year because we felt our kids still came to us in 4th grade. Some of them still really struggling with the distinction between fiction, nonfiction, poetry, functional text. How do you approach each one differently? How does your brain work when you're reading it? So we're focusing specifically on a fiction. We're focusing specifically on just 1 week of studying fiction. And we're going to link in the standard of 4.5E. Yeah. Problem and solution. How that's a structure of all fictional text. It usually has a problem, a solution. So this is our template, and as the recorder, I pre-fill in a lot of things. I'll go into the standards. I'll fill in the essential questions. I'll fill in the standard. And a lot of other things as well, but we'll get to those parts as we go through. So, facilitating.
I just want to add something on to her presentation. It is usually on the smartboard so that we all can see it. So whatever she's typing, that way if we notice that she didn't catch something we said, we can say, Megan, can you go back and add that to whichever box?
And because it's on an M drive or the OneDrive, everybody puts their piece in before we meet. She
Yes.
puts in her
WIDA
WIDA,
goals
she
before
puts
we
in
come
her
in.
SOL stems, so it's all there, and presumably, we've all looked at it before that first meeting to save time.
Yep.
Okay, so as part of our genre study, we decided we were going to start with narrative story structure, and we're going to focus on the standard of 4.5E. So why don't we all just read this quickly, and then we'll say something about it.
So we're going to sit quietly for a minute.
And this is, typically it is done, ahead of time so that they don't have to take too much time during the meeting to read the standard. Because you don't, as a team member, you don't just want to look at what Megan put on the template. You want to go in and actually read your curriculum and even highlight, the areas that you were focusing on for that meeting. Yep. Make it messy.
I'm just looking at the standards and I'm just noticing that conflict and problem are used interchangeably. So I'm thinking like when we start framing or when we do our lessons, we have to make sure we use the word conflict interchangeably with the word problem.
So I see Brenda's looking, oh, that's
Yes.
a bad highlighter. But it says identify the problem, conflict, and solution.
So I noticed that the verb on the standard is identify, which is a low level on Bloom's taxonomy. Like they don't have to analyze, they don't have to explain. All they have to do is identify.
That's important too. When I hear that, I think about VGLA, and when we're doing a piece of evidence for VGLA, that the verb there is identify.
So I was noticing bullet number 3 under the essential knowledge. Yeah, where it says, describe in depth a character setting or event, drawing on specific details from the text, words, actions, or character's thoughts. And I'm thinking that this says identify, but actually in a fiction, they're going to have to learn to explain the events fiction, narrative nonfiction, and poetry. So even though we're focusing on fiction for this problem solution, I think as we map out this genre study, we have to keep in mind there's nuances between the word narrative and the definition of a narrative nonfiction.
I was noticing when I did the vertical alignment that it says that you're going to identify problem and solution, but in here it says under the essential understandings it says that they need to explain events, procedures, ideas, or concepts in fictional text. Problem and solution is always going to be a major event when you're reading. So they're only having to identify it in the standard, but here it says they have to be able to explain the events. So that tells me that learning problem and solution is just the building block for what they're going to be doing later on in the unit, in the year, in other standards.
Okay, and as I was reading, I noticed here in bullet 2, it talks about, describe how the choice of language, setting, character, etc., which links to author's purpose, but those are all story elements of fiction that we're going to be addressing: character, setting, problem, solution. But I know we're not going to really dive deeply into author's purpose yet, or how it's a choice of the author, but I think it's important to know that when we come back to it, these story elements are going to really have to be ingrained in their heads when we return to author's purpose in fiction.
Okay, let's look at the vertical alignment.
Okay, since I do the vertical alignment, I always start off by describing what I noticed when I was putting it together, and then we all talk about it. So in 3rd grade, they just have to identify the problem and solution, main idea, theme, supporting details. But in 4th grade, it says the same standard, except we do know from what we all looked at the standards, and we saw that they have to be able to explain the events. So that's how it helps us understand how it's going to change when they go to 4th grade. And then in 5th grade, they have to identify the conflict or problem of plot. So they get deeper into the actual elements of a story in 5th grade. And they have to be able to describe the plot a lot better, a lot deeper in 5th grade.
Yeah, just looking at this, I noticed that 3rd and 4th are very similar, and then 5th, it seems like, whoa, it gets, like they're really into that rise and fall of the story.
And the verbs change, like now they're explaining and describing, so.
Does anyone else have anything to say about the vertical?
I just was going to agree with Brenda that it's crucial that because 5th grade most specifically uses conflict in the standards, that they're really learning in 4th that in 3rd it was a problem, now it's become a conflict, and then that's language that carries through to 5th grade. Okay, so Serena, you want to talk a little bit about how it's tested?
Okay. So before the meeting, since I'm the assessment guru, I look up the SOL stems, and then I'll send them to Megan so that she can fill them in the template. So some SOL stems that we found were the children first realize there's a problem when, just making it bigger.
Just pass it.
Oh, sorry. What problem does blank solve with blank's help? How does blank finally solve the problem? Which sentences identify the problem in the story? What is the main problem? Which question identifies the problem in the story? And then sentence frames that we will use in class to respond is the problem is, the solution is, the problem is solved when. And looking at released SOLs, there are no TEI problem solution questions, but as we were talking, we came to the conclusion that a TEI problem solution would probably look very similar to a cause and effect graphic organizer. Like they would have the 2 boxes and they'd have problem on one side and they would have to drag what was the solution.
So we're talking about adding this year a TEI problem and solution, even though we've not seen one. We're just going to assume that it could look similar to one we've already seen. So when I looked at the student performance by question, I have 2014 data, not 2015 yet, and I actually, in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, saw no one standard that was assessed for identifying problem or solution. But I can tell you that the standards that matched from 3rd grade was with story structure, character settings and events, 84 in our school and 88 in the division, comparing 65 and 46 and 47. Identifying, which is the taxonomy we're working with right now, setting was 65 and 61, so that tells me that's something we need to work on. And as we talk about story structure, locating explicit information, which is pretty strong in 4th grade. I highlighted cause and effect because that's a relationship we're thinking about establishing the problem solution. It was 72% in 4th grade. And then important information in a story was only 61, which was compared to 72 in the division. And in 5th grade, the identification taxonomies with story structure was a 72 in the school, but a 71 in the division. And 73 in the school, another identify, and 81 in the division. And another identify, 83 and 87. So it seems like by 5th grade they had that, but we're still having weaknesses in that low level cognition in 4th grade. So I think we're on the right track for that based on previous data.
Yeah, so additionally, we filled in some key vocabulary we're going to be using, and we've all agreed that we're going to display this on a word wall this year. So we just have fiction, character, setting, problem, solution, events, author, and narrator.
Can we also add conflict then?
Oh,
We didn't ever add it.
which is why we go through it as a team,
Yeah.
so that we can see what we missed. Okay. And then in this box, we fill in some ideas for differentiating for different needs. So far we just have pictures using a grade level and a lower level text. We know this year the group we're getting is very varied in their reading levels, so we thought it was really important this year, especially in the beginning, that they can access the text, because many of them are not going to be able to access a level 40 text. We said small group instruction if needed, guiding students to sections of text to search. In the beginning of the year, we wanted to kind of point them in the right direction, look at paragraph 2 to find the setting, so they don't have to search the whole text. And then using our word wall and constantly repeating these words throughout the week. So,
We're not on the back to our
task
assessment.
All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is the task analysis, which is what we feel students should be coming to us with and what they need in order to start this unit. So usually for this part, we kind of just throw out ideas and I make a list. So I was thinking from 3rd grade, they definitely need to know what character, setting, and events are. So no character, setting, events.
They need to know how to retell a story, beginning, middle, and end.
Sequential
Yeah.
order.
I think what you said is important, Serena, because when I was working with 3rd graders last year, and I noticed kids having difficulty locating information, I said, show me the beginning of the story. And they're like,
Or even
show
when
me
you ask
the
them what
middle.
happened.
When you say show me in the middle, that's where it started breaking down. They're like, yeah, they're not really sure where that is. So
I think they should know the difference between fiction and nonfiction.
Yeah, I think by 3rd grade they should know.
I think they know the general structure of a poem too, poetry. Just generally.
And so we look at the vertical alignment, so we know they've had problem solution. So I'm hoping
They
they're
should.
coming with a vocabulary of problem and solution.
Yeah, they may
Knowing-
not know conflict.
Right. But hoping they know problem is something that has gone wrong.
well, if we think they know the vocabulary of problem solution, don't we believe that they can identify a problem and a solution
Yeah,
in not
they
in
should
fiction?
be able
They should
to.
be able to identify a problem and a solution.
So sometimes I abbreviate just to make it go faster, and hopefully everyone can figure out what P is.
What about, in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, we kind of use the same graphic organizer when we were doing narrative. So shouldn't we expect them to be able to fill out a graphic organizer about a story?
Did 3rd grade use
A
the same graphic?
modification, yeah.
Okay, so now we're gonna look at the WIDA can-dos that Brenda has already put in here. I think it's kind of small, is it?
Okay, basically, if you look a level 1 student, we need to make sure that we use visuals, and they basically can name the fiction elements. They can basically tell you who the character is, what the setting is, what the problem is, and the solution. But if you look at a level 2 students, you look at the verb that it is using identify, which is what our objective is. So we're going to expect the level 2 student to identify the problem and solution and the character, setting, and events. But as you can see from levels 1 through 4, they're always asked to have illustrations or visuals for support. And level 4, they should be able to summarize the problem and solution. And then it is not till level 5 is when they can actually summarize and determine the important events by using a grade level text.
But one thing we noticed, because remember we kind of talked about this together, that the taxonomy for this standard is only identify. If you match the WIDA, we couldn't just put identify, because
Yes.
that doesn't match the WIDA can-do descriptors. So let's look at the assessment we're going to use. So we decided in this genre study that each week we're going to quick check what we've been teaching. So we start by designing the quick check before we actually start framing our teaching.
Okay.
We do this every time.
All right.
Okay, so this is the graphic organizer that we used last year for narrative structure, and we wanted to change it because we thought that the problem and solution box was a little confusing to kids, and then we wanted the middle boxes to look like the event flow chart like the kids see on the SOL. So we started changing that. So and usually what happens is, this is what happens. Serena got on the computer, she started recreating it, and the points breakdown have to do with how we're going to assess it. So we said, what if we make it look like this? So we're trying to make changes to it, and we came up with this draft, and then we showed it to Megan, and Megan said, well, you know, the problem and solution in a story is not always in the same part. So it's confusing for kids if we put problem at the top and then events in the middle and solution at the bottom. They don't always understand the structure, and they're going to think that's the way it goes, linearly, in a linear fashion, but that's not always the case.
So what you're saying is sometimes there's a problem and then a solution and then another problem arises.
Actually, we were thinking more along the line of like Camp Out Surprise, which is a released VDOE passage. The problem and solution are at the end,
Okay.
but the major events are occurring throughout the whole story. So she wanted them to know that the solution, especially the problem and solution, can be in different parts of the
Right.
text.
The problem doesn't have to come first, and the solution doesn't have to come.
But you're
But
right,
that's
that
not-
we would show them multiple problem and solution, but not right now.
Right, and that's not what we taught last year. We did teach them that the problem can come at the end of the story, but that flow chart confused them. And it actually confused us too when we were teaching it, because it was hard to explain to them, well, no, it doesn't have to,
It's
but
not always like that.
But if we just switched it, it would just be easier to explain to them, and we wouldn't have to go through and waste time.
And
So
if we
then-
look how we modified it with the problem and solution, that's like the TEI question that we were talking about, how it could be the cause and effect box.
So we're gonna lift
side
that
by
out,
side.
and when we get to events, determining what's important, we're gonna lift that out, so it's not gonna be something that's new to them.
And the reason we did that was because we decided that if it's an event, or if the problem and solution are always gonna be a major event in the story. 'Cause if it's the problem, it's gotta be one of the major events, so, yeah, so it'll end up in these boxes anyway.
So that's what we came up with for the final graphic organizer.
So after, we modified it, this is our final copy.
Yeah.
And then something that I want to just point out here, and this is something that it's still a work in progress with our teams, but also having a discussion about what are you going to accept in all the boxes.
We'll get ready to do that.
Yeah, so And that's when she said, you know, the numbers down the side determining how many points you're going to give so that everyone's being assessed in a similar manner.
So, when we were discussing this assessment, we chose a released passage from an old SOL. It's called Camp Out Surprise. So, right now we were going to continue filling in our answer key. So, at the end of the week, we would expect students to read this text and complete this graphic organizer.
I think I forgot to mention that when we were creating this, we went back to the idea that although events are important, our standard is problem and solution. So what we're going to do to remedy that is, right now, it's not their job to determine important events. Do I expect them to be able to write it down? I do, but that's not what I'm teaching. I'm teaching problem and solution. So we went back and forth about what to do about that, and we decided to just go ahead and give them the events. No choices. There's going to be 4 and 4, and they're going to cut them and glue them in an order. That's it.
Yeah.
We're not going to make 5 choices.
So more or less, you're kind of assessing something that they've learned in the past that they should have a
Right.
sequential order.
So
of
that would be
events.
diagnostic,
This is more diagnostic.
whereas that part is going to be formative. Can they tell us flat out what is the problem?
So
What is the
your
solution?
focus on grading is problem solution.
Yeah, and also something about this flow chart, we also talked about what we would accept for the answers, but we also talked about how we're going to word it to make sure we get the answers that we want. So at first it didn't say important characters, it just said characters, but there's an extra character in the story that's not important. So we wanted to make sure we weed out words or like add words to make sure that we get the exact answer that we want from them.
And that was our reasoning behind having 3 lines as well. They can
Right.
only write 3 characters, even though there's technically 5 mentioned. So they need to choose 3. Don't try to squeeze Mom and Katie in there, because they're not important.
We also talked about where we would put where it says for the setting, that we should put that to look in paragraphs 1 through 4, just to kind of make some scaffolding. Because sometimes they don't know where to look to find the setting.
Right. And they'll see that on the SOLs too. They'll say in paragraph blank, you know, what was the setting or, you
Or
know.
like which sentence describes the setting or,
Right,
yeah.
right.
I think we talked about where to look to, because in paragraph 2 it says, today Todd's family was leaving for their yearly camping trip, and the kids aren't going to know. A lot of our kids don't know what yearly means, and packed the night before. So we're going to tell them, if you look in paragraphs 1 through 4, we circled Silver Creek Park. We're expecting, because they have prior knowledge with the parks, that they'll get that. And that late afternoon, but later in the story it says night, that we would accept that too. But we had a lot of conversation about our ESOL students and what kind of words we figured they would get stuck on, or concepts, and that's why we wanted to scaffold at the beginning of the year, showing kids in paragraph 1 to 4, or it might even say for some kids, in paragraph 4, where is the setting, you know, to give them some help.
Okay. So we should take a few minutes to see if we all agree on a problem and solution and choosing 4 important events.
Yes.
Okay, so I took the flow chart and I used the story to create the problem and solution. Do you want me to read it?
Okay.
Oh, I can put it
You wanna
in
put
it.
it in?
Yeah. Do you want to read it?
Alright, so for problem, you said Todd and his dad hear a noise outside their tent. Right, I
That is the
think
problem.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. Solution, they discover it's Buddy, the dog, eating the food.
Okay.
Okay, I agree. So I'm not gonna write that because we could just use this as the answer key. Okay, I don't wanna redo it.
All right, so at this point, if one of us disagrees, we'd start having a conversation like, I don't see that as a solution, or isn't there another problem? You know, that's where we would start having a discussion.
And we get into some pretty deep discussions sometimes. I mean, problem and solution is one of the more basic, I guess, standards. But we get into sometimes discussions that will take the rest of the block. And that's okay, because that's what you want. And that's what makes this process so valuable. And we do try to stay at least a week to 2 weeks out ahead in our unpacking and planning. But again, that takes time as well. So we put a lot of time in ahead of time. So just keep that in mind.
What if a kid says, the solution is they put the food in the van?
That's not the solution.
That's not.
Yes, it is. It's in the last
It's in paragraph
paragraph.
11.
Oh,
I mean,
What would we say?
well, the problem is the
Oh, he
noise.
says, why don't we
Is
though?
the noise.
Yeah,
So
but the
what
noise,
is
that's
the
not
noise?
fixing the noise.
Yeah.
I think the
Yeah.
solution has to be something about the dog.
But it
Yeah.
also says, why don't we? And if they understood the story, they never said, we put the food in the van.
It just says why
It's
don't
a
we put-
suggestion.
Yeah.
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 So what would make a kid think that that might be, so we have to think about that when we're teaching, that
Yeah.
direct relationship, because some kid might look at that and say,
Well-
well, they just put the food in the van, that solved the problem.
I guess it's
Yeah, but
how we've
that's
talked
not-
before in the past, that we teach our kids to use their schema when they're reading and answering questions, but sometimes they rely on it too much and forget that you have to use the story.
They're not supposed to be reading.
Or they have to have
Yeah.
a very clear picture in their head, what is a problem, what is a solution, so that when we're teaching, when we frame the teaching, we have to be very specific about that and think about to teach out the error piece, because I see that as an error, somebody's gonna say that.
Well, and then if I think about it, I would say, what is the most important word in the problem? Noise.
Noise,
What,
yeah.
putting the food in the van solves the noise problem? No,
No.
it's finding the dog. He's making the noise. So that's another way to help them.
So when we pick a story to teach this, we have to have one that parallels this.
Mhm.
We have to have that, yes.
You might have to write one.
Or modify one that we
Yeah.
have.
They have 3 flash.
Yeah, we have to do that.
This is the third time.
All right, so let's look at what,
Lots of problems.
yeah, let's look at what Megan has for the events and see if we want to tweak anything. So she says, first, Todd and his family get ready for a camping trip. Next, the family arrives and sets up the campsite. Then Todd and his dad hear a loud noise outside the tent. And last, they discover it is Buddy, the dog, eating the food. And I noticed you labeled it problem and solution.
Are we gonna label it like that when they sort it, or just leave it alone for now?
I think you were just pointing out that the problem and solution
Right.
can be events
Yes.
too.
Right.
So when
Something
we
that
go
I
over
worried
the
about when I
check.
did this too was, I didn't get these sentences directly out of the text. I had to paraphrase it, which we don't teach till later in the year. So,
But we're gonna be giving them the sentences.
oh yeah, that's right,
Yeah.
I'll give them this,
So-
but even with the problem and solution, I paraphrased it, so.
But I think that's beneficial
they have to
because,
do that.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, they have to, they're not gonna say it like that on the SOL, like word for word.
Right.
And it helps with retelling the story.
So when we use this as a diagnostic piece and we give them that to sort and glue, are we also gonna are we gonna show some kids where to look? Are we going to ask some kids where did they look?
I think for this part, to put events in order when they're given to you, that's a skill.
That they
I
should
mean,
be
have they
able
done
to
it
do
since
this in
second grade? first?
Yes, they
So
should be able to do
I
that.
mean, if a kid can't do that, that's gonna be like a remediation piece.
Exactly.
And
I
something
can't see many of them needing support with that, I'm hoping.
Something we did last year was we also had them go back to the text and label 1, 2, 3, 4. So if they're finding that event in the story, even though it's not word for word, they can say, oh, in paragraph 2, that's when they started preparing for